Sekhsaria from India, and Pankaj is what we would call in European culture a Renaissance man, I think, with many different hats. He's a journalist, a researcher, a novelist, photographer, campaignist, and not by no means least an academic. He's an associate professor at the Centre for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas in India, and it's at the Institute of Technology in Bombay. What is interesting as well about his writing as a novelist is that his novels mostly concentrate on the area in India, the 500 islands of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, that he looks at both from the point of view of being an academic, but also as a creative writer. And I would highly recommend to you his novels such as The Last Wave from 2014, that's been published by the prestigious publisher HarperCollins, and other novels. He also writes about these islands from a more cultural, scientific point of view as well, in another volume called Islands in Flux. And concerning his creative writing, he's just published his very first children's book called Waiting for Turtles. And I was just saying to colleagues of mine that not just the story, but also the illustrations are particularly beautiful in this book for children. I think we've also got a duty to remember as well Pankaj's steady, constant work as a journalist in prestigious publications like the Indian daily newspaper, The Hindu, where he's calling attention to the issues and the problems in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And all these, not all, but these 4 or 5 different significant contributions he's made to the Hindu are in the links that we've put on the chat. You can also find a link as well to the children's story I just mentioned. So it's with great pleasure then that I'll hand over, the chair to Pankaj to talk about in detail his work in this island culture and the kind of research he's doing there. Thank you, Pankaj.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Am I audible? Is the sound okay?
You are, absolutely.
Great. Thank you. It's a privilege to have been invited to speak, and I'm really thankful for this opportunity. I was just mentioning that I've not been able to really attend any of the other in the series, and they do look very fascinating, and I'm hoping I'll catch up. And I'm always quite delighted to speak about these islands where I've been working for over 25 years now. I don't live there. I live in a very different part of India, but it's quite an exceptional part of India with a very interesting political, ecological history, socio-cultural kind of a context. And what I propose to do in the next 40 odd minutes, hopefully, is give you a quick glimpse of what these islands are. And this was not the title I had sent in to Ricardo and Maggie and others when they got in touch, but this is something I have been talking about these islands for the last couple of years now. And I just thought it will be a useful thing for me to present it here, both as something I am working on, but also to get some feedback from all of you, and also for us to think of a kind of a larger conceptual possibility in what I am suggesting. And as you will see on the screen, it's titled At the Trijunction of Fragility and Vulnerability, the story of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And something more recent, which again is not a very new idea, is to ask the question of what would it mean to think like the islands? Or for that matter, think, it is an anthropocentric idea, but to start thinking like a particular ecosystem. It could be a rainforest, it could be a coastline, it could be a river system. What does it mean, and why does it actually Why is it important? And I will take the example of this particular island system. I will try and give you a glimpse of what this island system is so that it is not too abstract or conceptual, but try and make this claim of the trijunction of fragility and vulnerability. So I will come to this idea of how this came to be, and this is one of the books that Maggie mentioned that I published recently called The Islands in Flux, which is a collection of over about 20 years of my journalism in these islands. The title was, we titled the book Islands in Flux because looking through 20 years of writing, it became very evident to me that one thing that remained constant, as we all know, was change, flux, constant churning at multiple levels, which we all know is a standard feature of all existence as a matter of fact. So what I realized in thinking, and it's still not thought through very, very scientifically, but I would propose that there is something for us to work with here, is that all this, I mean, the world that we are part of, the life that we live, can be kind of constructed around three axes. These can be laid out temporally, and these are represented in the three pictures on the right hand side. The three axes are the geological, the ecological, and the socio-cultural. And if one goes by the temporal dimension of the whole thing, one could well argue that the first, the ecological, the geological context, the kind of brick and mortar of the planet, much before there was life. We know we go back millions of years into the construction of the solar system and the Earth, and a number of factors, including the geological factors, with the mysteries of evolution and life coming about. We have certain ecologies coming to play. Now, these ecologies are very deeply influenced by the geology of the landscape, the gradients, the soil, how the water flows, the hydrology, etc., etc. So they're very unique ecologies. So all geological systems give rise to very unique ecological systems. And I think equally, perhaps if not more interesting, is the socio-cultural context that is then dependent and based upon this ecology and this geology. So we all know across the world, and certainly in a country like India, if you go back, I mean, India is such a diverse country. It's in some senses, it's a microcosm of the planet, right from the high Himalayas to the coastline, to the deserts, to the rainforests, to the rivers. We have a very large diversity of systems. And like anywhere else, if we go back, say, 2 or 3 generations on planet Earth, people living in these different ecologies and different geologies lived their lives very deeply influenced by those ecologies and those geologies. Whether it was the food that people ate, whether it was the clothes that people wore, whether it was the agriculture that people did, whether it was the houses that people made. So so temporally, in a sense, the geology influences the ecology, influences the socio-cultural context. And like I said, the 3 pictures on the right-hand side are very simplistic representations of that. So these are the 3 axes, like I mentioned. So one way is to look at them in a kind of temporal manner. The other more symbolic idea, and that is where the idea of fragility and vulnerability also comes in, is to look at it as the 3 legs of a tripod. And we know that for a tripod to be balanced, these 3 legs, these 3 axes have to be balanced out themselves. And the idea that struck me when I was looking at the last 20, 25, 30 years of my work in the islands, which is a kind of a record of the contemporary story of these islands. One sees 2 things that happen. One sees that either in our development planning and thinking, and this I would propose can be extended everywhere, and in some sense the Anthropocene is a very interesting manifestation of that, is that on the one hand we do not account for, because we don't understand and respect the existing dynamics of the system. How rivers flow, what happens, whether there are earthquakes, what is the ecology of the place, etc., etc. So we don't account for that. And because of that, sometimes in arrogance and ignorance, the interventions that we make are so huge, so phenomenal, and of course the Anthropocene is the classical example of that, those interventions, is that this existing balance is then completely disturbed. So what is a very fragile system then becomes terribly vulnerable, because we have not accounted for the changes, and because we have not accounted for the changes, the developmental inputs that we do disturb that balance so much that anything can collapse very, very quickly. Now, this I will go through in great detail to explain in the context of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I wanted to take some time to set this up so that each of these strands, each of these axes, the geological, ecological, and the socio-cultural, I can explain to you in brief. And like I've been saying, I think we can extend this to any kind of system. So like I mentioned, has the slide moved? You're able to see the next one now? Just checking with the audience. Everybody, yeah? I can't hear.
Yes,
yeah.
we can see you. Yeah.
So, like I said, this is the book, my most recent book, which is the collection, and it was in putting this story together that this kind of three axis comes up. And the picture on the right hand side is what you see on the right hand side top is a picture of an exposed coral reef. And I will come to the details of what this is. This is we all know coral reefs are permanently underwater, but here you have a picture of 2004, 2005. Where an entire coral reef is permanently exposed and because of that completely dead and gone. And there's a very interesting backstory to that. I'll come to that. The middle picture represents a very classical example of a tropical rainforest, which is where these islands are in the tropics. And the picture at the right-hand side bottom is a picture by my anthropologist friend called Vishwajit Pandya, who works with the tribal communities in these islands. And you have some very amazing human communities in these islands, of which we actually know very, very little. We don't know how they came there. They what used to be called negritos, but I think that's not the correct name anymore. But they're people as if they've come out of Africa. How long have they been there? How did they get there? How they live their lives? We know very little. What we do know is that the numbers are very small. They have been very small since the beginning because these are hunting, gathering, nomadic tribes that live entirely on this tropical rainforest island system. They are very, very small and they are slowly but surely being pushed to the brink of extinction. So there are a total of 6 tribal communities in these islands, very small in numbers, increasingly marginalized in numerical terms, in land being taken away. So that's the very interesting dimension of the socio-cultural context. I'll come to that as well. Here is a quick kind of geography lesson, if I might kind of argue. If you get an idea of where we are located on the global map, this is India. This is the Indian coastline on the east coast of India. You can see the cursor moving. This is the island country of Sri Lanka. Here you have Myanmar, Burma, which we know is currently in the throes of tremendous turmoil. And here the little circular thing emerging out of the bottom is Indonesia. This is the island of Sumatra. So I'm just locating the islands for you. These are the islands. These are the Andaman Islands. These are Nicobar Islands, located in the Bay of Bengal. And as is very evident, it's far away from mainland India. If some of you are aware of the geography of India, this is Bangladesh, Kolkata or Calcutta, which is one of the major ports, and Madras or Chennai, which is the other major port, which are the 2 main points of connection with these islands, either by ship or by air. So as you will see, very evidently in this map is that this is far away from mainland India. These ports are roughly 1200 kilometers from this island chain, whereas Myanmar and Sumatra are maybe only about 100-150 kilometers. So these islands are it is an account of Indian history and being colonized by the British, and who set up actually a penal colony here. The islands have a very interesting history in the context of India's independence struggle, and there are many other dimensions, but we won't have time to go there and I won't do that. But just to quickly mention is that these are the peaks of a submerged mountain range known as the Arakan that extends in this arc from Myanmar in the north to Sumatra in the south. So we have a very interesting, it's biogeographically, it is in the Southeast Asian realm. It has connections with mainland India in terms of the ecological elements. It has a very interesting geology, and it is very far away from India with a very interesting history and a socio-cultural context. And I just want to point you and draw your attention to the star at the right-hand side bottom of the map. It is an approximate location. It's not coordinated in that sense with the coordinates. But this star is a very important marker of the recent history of this region. This is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 26, 2004, which was the originator of that massive, gigantic tsunami of South and Southeast Asia that we've not seen in living human memory. It was 9.3 on the Richter scale. It was a tsunami that went across the globe and a few 100,000 people died. And you can imagine the proximity of the incident, both the earthquake and the tsunami, to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and what you can imagine may have been the implication and the impact of this tsunami on this particular region. Keep this at the back of your mind, and we'll come back to that towards the end. So just another quick picture. 8,000 square kilometers, actually a very small area compared to anything else you will see. Even in the map, you will realize on a big global map, you might not even have place to show these islands. They are divided in a particular way between the Andaman and the Nicobar groups. This is the 10-degree north latitude channel that divides the two. So we are very much in the tropical belt. And like I mentioned earlier, you can see the star here again. You see Banda Aceh, you see Sumatra. It was off the coast of Banda Aceh, if you remember, that the earthquake had happened and that had caused the tsunami. So that's the context. I just want to go on first to the second of the three axes I mentioned, the ecological. This is a tropical ecosystem. It is located bang in the middle of the tropics. And as you know, tropical systems would be high rainfall, high humidity, high sunlight, high trophic levels, and luxuriant forests. Soils are not very good because these are kind of mountainous areas. But the top layer of the soil is very good, and you have fantastic forests. Here you see a very nice cross section of a forest going up the gradient quite sharply because we are on the top of a mountain system. You have at the low tide, you have the mangroves. Behind that, you have the littoral forests, which are the pandanus, or what's known as screw pine. And shooting up in the canopy are some of the dominant species of the tropical rainforest. Here is the white one, which is known as they are the diptocarps, which are very good plywood species. And that has a history of its own because plywood was a big industry here. I'll give you some glimpses of the beauty of this place. Down south, almost neighboring Indonesia. Sorry, did somebody say something? Okay, I heard something. So you can please interrupt me if I'm not clear or things are going wrong. I'll just give you some glimpses of the ecological wealth and richness of this place. Island ecosystems, we all know, are very unique because of isolation over millions of years. The speciation and endemicity is very high. Here you have a classical example of an endemic bird species, which is found in that island I showed you just north of Sumatra, island called Great Nicobar. This is a bird known as the Nicobar Megapod, and as the name suggests, it's found only in the Nicobar Islands on this planet, nowhere else on the planet. There are relatives of this, so the megapod is found in other island systems, but what you have in the Nicobar in this island group is very unique. It's a very, very interesting bird itself. You can see it's a bulky, chicken-sized bird. And what you see at the bottom where it is standing, this mound of this little brown of earth, is a very interesting nest that the bird makes. So the bird makes a nest that is actually a mound of earth. On the coastline, just beyond the high tide line, the male and the female over many years will actually scrape up mud and decaying matter and stuff like that, and make a little mountain of an earth about 4 or 5 feet in height. And that mountain of earth is the nest of the bird. So the bird does not build the conventional nest we know birds to build of sticks and leaves and stuff like that, but it's a collected mound of earth in which the bird lays its eggs. And it's also known as the thermometer bird because it is not incubating the eggs, but it needs to ensure that the temperature of incubation is roughly the right one around the eggs, and it's constantly checking with its beak, perhaps as to what the temperature might be, and then will either remove mud or add mud. So a very unique bird. It actually just lives on the coastline. It's primarily a coastal dweller. So was very badly affected when the tsunami hit. And some of the newer development plans that Maggie was mentioning in the beginning that I've been writing about are proposed in exactly this belt where this very unique species of bird on the planet actually survives. From the forest, just a quick glimpse of the mangrove on the coastline. Again, I'm guessing all of you are aware of the mangrove forest ecosystems. They inhabit that very complex, very thin part of the planet between the high tide and the low tide, where the water is coming and going. There is high salinity, there are high winds, and I'm also guessing in school books in Italy, in biology, in India we have them. We have lessons in how mangroves adapt to systems because of the high salinity and stuff like that. So there are many very interesting adaptations we see in mangroves. You see one here which are known as the breathing roots. So these little sticks that are emerging from the soil, about 2 feet, 1.5, 2 feet in height, are actually part of the root system, and they are known as pneumatophores, which translates as breathing roots. They actually help the plant breathe. because of the waterlogged soil, there is no air in the soil that helps the plant. So the plant actually throws up, one species of them throws up roots that actually grow against gravity and towards the sun, where we all know that roots grow away from the sun. They help the plant breathe. And if you ever get a chance, it's a very spongy kind of little half an inch thick. So it's actually full of air vacuoles helping the plant breathe. From the coast, another very important dimension of the coast are the beaches, and beaches are among the most sought after kind of parts of the planet for tourism and stuff like that. The coast itself, if one looks at statistics, certainly in India are among the most industrialized, or those areas that are sought for maximum development of all kinds: roads, tourism projects, infrastructure projects, defense projects, economic special zones. It's also the place where millions of people live in India. They're dependent on the coast and the seas for their livelihoods. And then there are these beaches across the globe and in these islands, which are the nesting sites for turtles. And often when I show this picture, there's certainly somebody in the audience who will say that this is a tractor that has gone down the beach. And interestingly, in many cultures, in local languages, this is the track of a turtle that is indeed called the tractor turtle, or in this case, it's called the tractor kachua, kachua being turtle in Hindi, which is the language in India. So this is the track of the giant leatherback, which is the largest of the 7 species of turtles we find in the planet, or in the planet of the ocean, the ocean of the planets. It can grow up to 6-7 feet in length. Okay, so it's about as tall as an average human male is, about 5.5 to 6 feet. It can be about 600 to 700 kilograms in weight, and one of the gentlest giants on the planet. So if there was an award that we gave to a gentle giant, the giant leatherback would be a very good contender. Now, what's interesting about, and I won't go into this because I don't think we have the time, but sea turtles are, and their nesting sites are very, very emblematic and symbolic of the challenges that the planet faces today, because rising levels of the oceans are going to submerge coastlines. Some of you might be aware that the sex, actually not gender, sex of the baby turtle is decided by the temperature at the time of hatching, like it happens in crocodiles and some other reptilians. So, and it has been found that higher temperatures, and we're talking of a few point degrees higher, changes the ratio of the sex of the baby. So higher temperatures mean more females. And already there are research in the last couple of years from hatcheries in the Pacific, where they're finding that 70, 80, 90% of the new hatchlings are all female. This is a very new route to extinction. So even if the beaches are not destroyed by the rising levels of the ocean, rising temperatures could change the complete demographics, and you might have generations after generations of only females, and that's another route to extinction. And I mean, there's much more to be said, but I won't go into the details because there's a lot more else that I want to talk about. And this is a picture of the giant leatherback on this turtle nesting beach in Great Nicobar, just north of Sumatra. So turtles are among the most amazing creatures. To be able to watch a turtle nest on any of these abandoned or desolate beaches anywhere on the planet is one of the most fantastic experiences you can get, because it shows you the vulnerability of the creature, and it humbles you to be able to just kind of witness what's happening in ways that we don't fully even understand. So leatherback turtles, like this one, there was a recent study by scientists in India who satellite tagged them. They tracked them putting a satellite transmitter, and they were found a few weeks later to be swimming in the waters of Australia and of the eastern coast of Africa, which is about 14,000 kilometers from these island chain. So these really are the globetrotters. These are the citizens of the planet, and the way things are changing and the way what we are doing, I think lots of things are going to be very seriously threatened in time to come. From the coastline to the ocean, this is a coral reef system in which you see a moray eel. A very interesting ecosystem. Coral reefs are the rainforests of the ocean. Huge diversities, huge richness, very important for fisheries, very important for maintaining global systems. very important for the livelihoods of millions of people who depend on fisheries and these things. And they're all very nicely interlinked in the system of forest, coastline, ocean, shallow oceans, and deep ocean. And here, like I mentioned earlier, in this whole system is this picture of a community known as the Jaraba Tribals. They call themselves the Ang. I won't go into the details here because it's a complex story. They have changed rapidly. Till about 20 years ago, and for a very long period, for the last 150 years, these people have been known to be very aggressive and hostile. They are known to have killed people with bows and arrows if you entered their forest. We don't know why that happened. Perhaps some fear of the outsider, which is also there in other communities. We have seen that. But in the last 20 years, again, for reasons we don't know, they've come out of their circle of hostility and isolation in ways that perhaps cannot be, of course, we can't go back, but you may not have wanted it, but there's nothing can be done about it. But rapidly changing cultural, physical, physiological systems of this community. The total population is only 400. It has always been small because we know that forest dwelling, hunting, gathering, nomadic communities have small numbers because in some senses the numbers are fixed by the capacity and the food and the resources available in the forest that they're roaming around. But the story to be told is that in the last 150 years, with the British colonization, with the coming in of disease, with the changing of food habits, with the takeaway of forest land, these communities are deeply, deeply threatened. I give an example of the Great Andamanese, which was a kind of a brother community to this community. Although they had inter-tribal rivalries, the British counted about 5,000 of that community in the 1850s, in the middle of the 19th century. Today, about 150 years, 160 years later, that community is down to just about 50 people. So pretty much a vibrant, viable community across these islands has been wiped out, and we don't know how long they will kind of live on. So it's gone. I mean, the culture is gone, the languages are gone. Their knowledge of the forest and what they did is gone. And besides the point of the complete inappropriateness or the violation of their fundamental right to their life and their rights to the land and the forest. Some of us have taken up these issues in the media, with planners, in the courts, but there's only that much you can do because the march, as it were, of time is of a particular kind, and it seems very unfair to a whole set of very marginalized communities, which are both human and non-human. I just won't go into the details, but this is a map from a report we did for UNESCO 10 years ago. It's called the Jaraba Tribal Reserve Dossier, and you can access it. The full PDF is available online. If you search for my name and UNESCO and the Andamans, you're likely to get this. I won't go into great details here again, but this area here, what you see on the left-hand side of the map, the green and with hatched lines, is a very interesting unit, even a legal unit in the policy, in the landscape. This is a tribal reserve that has been set up by the government of India way back in the 50s. And this patch of forest is about 1,000 square kilometers. It is the best of the last remaining tropical forest in these islands. As a matter of fact, this is the only remaining contiguous tropical forest system in these islands. And this is exactly where the Jarabas stay. And this, what you see in the yellows are also similar forests, used to be similar forests. All of this in the last 100 years has been cut down for timber and forestry operations, has settled people from outside, from mainland India for various political and other reasons, have brought in agriculture, horticulture, and things like that, and the entire landscape has very drastically changed. And this forest remains what it was because of actually the hostility and the aggression of these people that for the last 150 years did not allow the so-called modern man to enter these forests. So it's kind of ironic that because we, with all our knowledge and capacity, were not allowed to enter those forests, is why this forest still survived. And like I said, things are changing very rapidly, both for the people and the forest, and there's a tough call ahead. But let me come, so if I go back to the beginning of my talk, I mentioned the geology, I mentioned the ecology, and I mentioned the socio-cultural context. I spoke to you a little bit about the ecology. Very, very briefly, I have touched upon the socio-cultural context with the example of just the tribal communities. But there is a more interesting history, as all of us will recognize, that over the last 150 years, with the British, with the penal colony, with other settlements happening, there is also other sets of communities that make it a very interesting socio-cultural melting point or melting pot. But there is a dimension of various multi-dimensional human reality there, of which the indigenous people, of course, are the first peoples, for example, and their rights and their stuffs, of course, become very, very important. But they're completely deeply dependent on this system. So if this forest has to go or goes, it's very unlikely that these communities will survive. Or if they survive, they can only survive as second-class citizens, because their entire system which has developed over thousands of years is deeply and very intricately linked, as you will imagine, with the forest and the ecology. So with the recap, there is the ecology, which was the second on my slide, the socio-cultural context. I now go back to the first of the axes I mentioned, which is the geological axis. And I'm going to take the example of, and I'm going back to that point I made to you in the beginning of the tsunami of 2004. So now, if we think about 2004, we all know it for the tsunami that happened, but we all also know that it is the earthquake that causes tsunami. And there was a very, very amazing kind of thing that happened with that earthquake, which has not been given as much attention, I would argue, as it should have been. I have done some writing, I have a couple of papers, I've been talking about it, a few others have been, but not to the extent that it should have. And I would just like you to, I'm hoping you can see my hand here. You will see, just as an example, the Andamans in the north, close to Burma, the Nicobars in the south, close to Sumatra, and roughly in the middle is the town of Port Blair, which is the administrative headquarters of these islands. And you can see in the map over here, with the moving of the arrow, in the north is the Andamans, in the south is the Nicobars, and here roughly in the middle is Port Blair. Now, what happened on the morning of December 26, 2004, when the earthquake of Sumatra actually took place, and then the tsunami happened? The earthquake of December 26, 2004 shifted these islands permanently in a manner that is very difficult to imagine, and a magnitude that is absolutely unbelievable. So we all, when we go to children's play parks, you have the seesaw where one side goes up and one side comes down, right, with children playing. So with the island, the Port Blair in the middle, this is just a very general kind of example, roughly speaking. That morning, the Andaman Islands came above water by about 4 feet. Permanent uplift of that land took place of about 4 feet. And the Nicobars in the south was submerged that morning. Some parts of the Nicobars were submerged that morning by 15 feet. 15 feet of permanent submergence and 4 feet of permanent uplift. That was the kind of shift that took place in this island system. You can imagine the change that would have taken place. And I'm not sure if you can see this map very clearly, but you see this Indira Point, which is the southernmost tip of this island. And you can see minus 4.25 meters. Now, this is a graphic of the map that was published in a newspaper, in a news magazine article I did then. And this is based on work done by a bunch of geologists at the University of Colorado. A lot of other people have also corroborated this part. But this is the kind of, so this 4.25 meter submergence. And here you see on the top left, +1 to +2 meters of uplift. +1, of course, means uplift. And this is the picture I showed you in the first slide, and I'll come back to that later. Now, these images on the right-hand side, these satellite images are very interesting images. They are images that were put out by what's called the National Remote Sensing Agency of India. This picture of a particular island in the middle of these, in this chain, an island called Kachal, is, you will see here from the 21st of December 04. This is like 5 days before the earthquake took place. And this image on the right-hand side is 26th of December 2004. That is the evening when that earthquake and tsunami took place. And the reds in the yellow circle are indicative of what has actually happened. All of this, which was land above the high tide line, is now permanently submerged underwater. So this island of Kachal, and you can see here, actually this area was among the most densely populated with another tribal community on this island, and the maximum number of casualties took place over here. Now, this importantly is the geological dimension that I'm talking about. In these islands, this is something that is very fundamental to the existence of these islands. They were created in this manner. Just like we said earlier, the dynamism of the coast, or the flow of the river, or the dry lands of the desert, or the fragility of a mountain range. And that is the point that I want to kind of emphasize. Sorry. So this is a picture of that island where we saw about, how much was that? 15-20 feet of submergence. You can see the coastline now. You can see this is taken about this picture is taken about a year after the tsunami took place. You can see that these are paddy lands. Water has come in maybe a couple of kilometers. These are some coconut plantations, permanently submerged in water, slowly drying and becoming brown. This is the coastal forest, some casuarina plantations, some mangroves, permanently submerged, becoming brown and dying off. So we see this complete change of the coastline because of the submergence that took place. This is a picture on the other side. This is on the northern part of the islands. This is on the west coast of a particular island known as Interview Island, where I was part of a survey team just 2 months after the earthquake. So this is a set of pictures of February 2005. These are 11 pictures taken of the about 120 degrees or 180 degrees of view and then stitched together, as you will see. And you can figure out that this is the coastline, the old coastline of that particular island. And here you have a coral reef system. This is the Porites or the boulder coral, the average height of which is about 4 feet, 4.5 feet. So a coral reef system that should be permanently underwater is now permanently above water. So the complete coral reef system is destroyed because the moment you're exposed to water, it's going to die. We have an entirely new coastline, right? You can see this patch of dark green was the old mangrove forest. So what was with the water reaching there at high tide will not be reaching anymore now. This is going to die. This is almost 20 years old now, so I don't know what the scene there is. But we'll have a new coastline. Perhaps sand will fill in. Maybe we'll have new beaches. Maybe the coast will move. Maybe the forest will move. So while you lose land on the one hand, on the one side, you actually gaining land on the other. And it's not a 2 + 2 or 2 - 2 kind of equation, but this is the dynamics of the system. This is what happens there all the time. So this is a kind of contrast of that whole thing. Now, what is also interesting here in this picture, this particular one, this is again a USGS graphic of 2008, if I remember right. And if it is clear to you, hopefully, you will see here is Sumatra, where the arrow is moving. You will see Myanmar here. You see the Indian Ocean. You see the Australia plate. You see Sunda plate. You see what's called the India plate. And here it's the Burma microplate. You don't see the Andaman and Nicobar Islands because there are only yellow dots. The big star here is the earthquake of December 2004. And the yellow dots are the earthquakes in these waters between 2004 and 2008. So this place, and I'll come to the next picture, is one that is constantly experiencing earthquake. There was an earthquake today morning in one of those islands, about 4 on the Richter scale. So on an average, there's an earthquake once a week in this island system. And the only point I'm trying to make here is that this is the geological reality of the place and we can't escape it. And I'm really short on time. So, and this is the Ring of Fire all around the Pacific, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are a part of the Ring of Fire. The short point I want to make is that if in development planning, if in thinking, we are not going to account for this geological reality of the place, if you're going to construct, if you're going to bring in infrastructure, if you're not going to think like that island does, what we will do is only going to cause a huge amount of damage tomorrow, because by ignoring the fragility, you have increased the vulnerability. And when there is an earthquake tomorrow, when there is an earth tsunami tomorrow, because there will be one, the damage that we will cause, you can imagine, will be absolutely phenomenal. I will, how are we doing with time? If somebody can tell me, Maggie or Ricardo, how much more time can I take, or should I be wrapping up?
Yeah, we've got another 10 minutes, Pankaj. Yeah,
okay. That's good. That's great.
Yeah,
I will take a couple of kind of disparate points, not tied up in different kinds of ways. Being a writer, being involved with communication as a photographer and as a writer, what I realized, and I realize increasingly, is that language and image making is not innocent. And this is something that's very difficult, for example, to communicate to scientists and to engineers. I'm in a technology institution. Language plays its own role. Images play their own role. Language performs. language is performative. And I'll give you two examples. And why? Because I think they actually language both conceals and sometimes reveals our deepest biases, our deepest norms. And while we cannot be independent of that because we all have values, I think it's important to be aware of that. Because what is aware and what is in the open is something we can deal with, but something that we don't realize is actually, or don't see, something that we cannot even deal with. In the 1960s, and these are all complex histories and presentations of their own, I won't go there. The government of India created a plan for the kind of setting up of sending more people to these islands because they had to be inhabited. There was nobody really staying here except for the tribal community. There were political and economic compulsions, and we've written critiques about that, but I won't go there. This is one of the reports in 1964 and 65 that was put together by the government of India for the, like it says, for the development of these islands. And I'll give you two examples of this language business I'm talking about. And the example here of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, but if you look in our backyards, if you look in what we are reading, each one of us will find examples of this kind. So as a much younger person, I was in my mid-20s when I started to work in these islands. I came across this report. And if you look at where the arrow is pointed out, is chapter number 12, a chapter titled Colonization. And as a much younger person with a lot more black hair and a lot less gray hair and wanting to get angry at the drop of a hat, it really angered me because what struck me then was in 47, this country became independent. From being a colony of the British, it became an independent nation. And within 2 decades, we were talking the language of the colonizer. We were talking of colonization. Now, one can well argue that this is not the same colonization or not the same intention, but the implication is quite similar. And the interesting point is that they're talking of colonization. It's not even a colony. And there's a choice of words and terms to be used. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the next one is manpower. We all know now that it is extremely inappropriate because what happens to the gender dimension. So the fact that it was used does not mean that it was innocent. It's just that deeply embedded ideas and value system. That this colonization thing really, angered me a lot. There was another very interesting one where the document talks of these lands as being Jaraba infested. Some of these forests. Jaraba being the tribal community because it's a very hostile community. It kills you if you try to enter their forests. But you see what I'm saying? In the 1950s, this forest land had been legally protected by the Indian Constitution for this tribal community. There's a Jaraba Tribal Reserve in 1956, and in the 1960s, you have a high-part Government of India committee referring to these islands and these forests as Jaraba infested. And the example here is India, but I don't think I need to really point out that this is not about any one state or people or culture or government or community. It's about how all of us actually look at some of this. And so Jaraba infested evokes a certain idea. Infestation is about a virus, is about a pest, is about something that needs to be removed. It forces us to react and perform in a particular way. If we were just to use different words, I sometimes do that in my class, and there is interesting response. If one said Jaraba inhabited area, the whole response to the situation changes. And if the same thing was articulated as Jaraba owned area, then the way you look at it changes completely. And this is very, very important because in the idea that we can be, or the belief that we can be objective, a lot of this thing kind of slips through. I won't go into details because again time, but this particular report suggested many interventions in these islands because we have to also imagine 60s were a particular time in India's history and the world's history. Biodiversity was perhaps not even a word in the English language. The values were very different, the challenges were very different. But the implications of what happens, is something that we have to deal with and we have to be aware of. So a whole set of development interventions take place, and these are not pictures of the 70s, but these are still very old pictures. This is a 1990 picture. This is a full-grown elephant in the timber yards of one of these islands, and just imagine the size of that timber. Imagine the girth, the diameter of that tree. That tree is the size of a full-grown elephant. Imagine what the tree would have been. Imagine what the forest would have been. This is what we are losing even today. I jump over. At the moment, there's another huge slew of development projects that are being proposed in these islands, driven by other considerations, which we have been trying to talk about. I won't go into some of that, just but to point to one other dimension of the language. We have these incredible India, islands of India kind of packaging for tourism. These are spectacularly beautiful islands, but also for a lot more than that. And there are many, many things to be discussed about that, but not for today. I will just give you another example of, and I'm going to wrap up very soon, is that this is a very prominent commentator, a political commentator in India, writing about 5-6 years ago, referring to these islands as a price piece of mid-ocean real estate. And it communicates something, right? So it's very clear how, see, it says that policy gurus in Delhi have consistently neglected and left unexploited. So the idea of the frontier space, of the fringes, as adjuncts to the nation state, which is a problem across the globe and a problem which island nations and island states face much more in the global, in the climate change context, in different ways. But all that's happened to these islands is from being infested by the communities that live there to becoming a piece of real estate in the mid-oceans. And we know what it means, because when land becomes real estate, it loses all value, it loses all other meaning. There are no histories. The ecological histories, the social histories, the cultural histories are all evacuated. This becomes the terra nullius, what Vishwajit Pandya, the friend I mentioned to you, the anthropologist, talks of empty space that you can then go in and do anything that you want. But that's not true, because all of these are inhabited by ecologies and geologies that are ancient, by people that are ancient, people who have histories, who have memories, who have ownership of land. This is not anybody's real estate. And this is not, I'm not talking to an international audience here. I'm saying this to my own people. I'm talking to my own policy planners, my own politicians, my own media people, and saying we can't do that. Not that anybody listens to us, but we keep trying. But this is the way things start to then change, because the context changes, and these places, they could be in the middle of a large landmass, don't exist for themselves. They don't have their own identity or their own purpose, and that cannot be allowed, because everything has to have its own purpose. Nothing's empty. How do we negotiate the challenges is a question, but it does not mean that they don't exist. And that is the point that I would like to drive home here. And we've had a former president of India actually propose a 250 megawatt nuclear power station here in his vision for the islands, 5 years after the earthquake that caused that tsunami in 2004. So what kind of imagination, what kind of vision that people have that we can think of in a seismic zone 5, in an area that experiences 7 and 8 and 9 Richter earthquakes on a regular basis? What is the logic of proposing a nuclear power station, and for what, is a question that completely beats my understanding. I will wrap up by completely jumping tracks and moving on to very relevant and related, is because I teach now in a technology institution. I have a PhD in something called Science and Technology Studies, which some of you might be aware of as a field of academic inquiry, where sociologists and anthropologists are studying scientists and technologies. So we are using methods and tools in, and actually Europe, and I did my PhD in the Netherlands 10 years ago. I started it there. So Europe has been at the forefront of this use of methods in history, sociology, anthropology to study the scientific object, to study the scientific process. And within that, of course, in the philosophy of science and technology, I just give you two very interesting and parallel examples of Lewis Mumford, the philosopher from the US in 1934, talking of technology as the polytechnic and the monotechnic. And if you look at the monotechnic, it's technology for its own sake, which oppresses humanity as it moves along its own trajectory, based on scientific intelligence, quantified production, directed towards economic expansion, military superiority. Very masculine. He gave the example of the automobile, but perhaps the nuclear power station is an even more drastic example of that. So the idea that we can control, the idea that science knows, that we know, that we will know, that we can control, that we can quantify, that we will understand completely, is what the monotechnic is based on. Whereas the polytechnic enlists different modes of technology, provides a complex framework. It is life-oriented, not work or power-centered. Now, this is a completely different conceptualization of technology, and it is not the dominant one, because the dominant one is the monotechnic. And more recently, another prominent scholar, Shira Jasanoff, talks of the technologies of hubris. A very beautiful formulation. And this is exactly quite mapping onto the mono technique. It talks about risk assessment, cost benefit analysis, modeling, where the idea is to get to be definite, to control, to manage, like she says, even in areas of high certainty. They ignore uncertainty and ambiguity. They focus on the known at the expense of the unknown, producing overconfidence in accuracy, completeness of pictures. Even the scientists will tell you that we don't know most things, and and we know that, and what we don't know, we don't know. Not only we don't know, but we also don't know what we don't know. So how are we going to be able to then account for those complexities? Like she says in the last line here, chemical toxicity impacts are based on impact of one chemical and not of a combination. Now this complexity, how are we going to deal with that? She has another beautiful articulation, which is of the method, the technologies of humility. What we need, and if you see here, acknowledging the limits of protection and control, technologies of humility, confront head-on the normative implications of a lack of foresight. We cannot have perfect foresight, which science and technology promises us to give. It's not possible. And I put this out here because that is the challenge, I think, in some ways. And we are technological creatures. My PhD supervisor, Viva Baika, who used to teach at Maastricht University, refers to all of us as technological cultures. So we are not devoid of technology. I mean, we cannot be. But we have to understand it differently. And it's important because the Andaman and Nicobar story, and perhaps all the stories we'll talk about, are the outcomes of certain technological visions that go along in parallel and sometimes or often in contradiction to what the real needs are. And I think these are very interesting ways to reimagine and rethink through some of the realities that we face today and some of the challenges, which is why I thought, while it might seem a little disparate from what I'm beginning to say, but I think it links up very well, because unless we understand this, we will keep proposing nuclear power stations in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and other places, even when we know tomorrow there will be an 8 Richter earthquakes and we'll have another Fukushima. But because we believe we can control, we will not account for that improbability and stuff like that. And I'll finish here. These are my 2 books. These are the books that I've been talking about. There's one more, I think. Oh no, there isn't. There's another picture. But this is on the top left is The Last Wave. This is the novel that I wrote in 2014. It's a story deeply embedded in the ecology and the history of the place. Lots of the things that I've spoken to you today come up in the story in different ways. On the right, on the bottom here is Islands in Flux. I showed you this picture earlier. This is a collection of 20 years of my journalism. This is a language translation of one of India's languages, this novel. And then this is the UNESCO document that you will get online if you Google for it. And I thought I had a slide with the pictures of my children's book, but I think that was in a different presentation. So that's my bad luck. But it's a book called Waiting for Turtles.
Maybe we've got the link, Pankaj. Ricardo, can you open the link of Waiting for Turtles?
And this is my last slide here.
Yeah.
This is email ID more than anything else. So if anybody wants to write to me, of course, the organizers of today's talk have my email ID, but you can get in touch with me. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your time. It's longer than I wanted to take, but I hope I have done justice. I'd be very happy for any comments, questions, reflections. I have time, so I'm happy for Maggie and Ricardo and Valeria to decide how much time we have. Thank you very much. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Pankaj. You've really eye-opening talk, absolutely, on these problems that don't just, impinge on Indian culture, but also obviously on the rest of the planet. I've just got one question before I throw out to the floor, for other questions. How big is the lobby, the people like yourself who are trying to actually do something about this situation in this island culture?
It is not very big. It's quite a small number of people. And I think the challenge is, I think what's more important is what the challenges are. And part of the challenge is to is to be able to communicate to the islanders themselves some of the things that I have been presenting to you. And by the islanders, I don't mean just the indigenous communities, because somebody like me does not even have access to them. I don't have physical access, and I don't have access of language and culture. I won't be able to talk to them. The people who are more like me, who come from the paradigm and the worldview that I come, even those people, those communities are not aware of some of these realities. And that's a failure of people like us, of activists, of education, of the larger systems, where communities living in such close proximity to such amazing life on Earth are not aware or have very limited opportunity of interacting with those creatures. To be able to go and see a nesting turtle in your backyard, I have seen turtles where I know there are thousands of people there who have not had the opportunity. They don't know you. To be able to understand that the oceans have whales and dolphins swimming, that these are the birds. So we've not been able to put together a system that will make them aware and make them proud of what they have. And it's a larger challenge, I think, all over. But this idea of economic development, aspiration, which also is very real and I think has to be accounted for. So while the set of people is small, and also we also get looked at as the no development people and the anti-development and wanting to keep the islands behind, because we come up every time there is something and cry foul. So we are also not very liked in some circles there. But the group is small, and the challenge is to kind of widen that group, certainly on the islands and definitely elsewhere.
I mean, I know you work with UNESCO. How much is UNESCO doing to conserve this culture?
There isn't much that they're doing, and I don't see that much can be done, because these are local issues. I mean, local at the local level of the islands and of the state and of the nation state. So whatever, and these are important contributors, and they are important contributions, and they do count. But they can only play an influencing role. They can play a role that is of a particular kind and is limited. Unless the more fundamental systems are more sensitive, beyond a point is not going to help. So the change has to happen on the ground, internally, with the help of everybody, this group of people here, with the institutions and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Se ci sono delle domande in italiano, fatti pure e possiamo tradurre. Se abbiamo anche dei giovani, no, dei licei, che nessuno ha ancora fatto qualche domanda, perché non chiedete qualcosa, Pankaj? Silence. Chris, have you not got any questions?
You're muted, Chris.
Chris, you muted.
Okay, yes, I'm now unmuted. Yeah. Well, I found that most enlightening. It's difficult to know what questions to ask. I suppose what can we do is one that's easily asked but not easily answered. I'm very sure. I think looking at what the tsunami did is actually, in a way, that's helped you to understand some things about that area, hasn't it? Yeah, I suppose my question would be, what can I do?
Yeah, no, it's very appropriate as well. The title of our seminars, Play Your Part.
Yes.
As you say, what can we do here in the West?
Yeah, so I really don't know, Chris. I mean, it's a very specific, there are larger things of a more general nature, where the ideas of development, of energy consumption, of, all those things, because that is where I think we all then end up aspiring for something. And in India, looking at the West is something that we do all the time. And if it's there, then that's what we want. And it's a difficult one to argue against all the time, because there are the international politics, there is history. And in India today, it's not very easy to be able to bring up some of these issues. But in the very specific context of these islands, the recent articulation has been that we want to make these islands into a Singapore. And some of the articles that I've been writing are actually responding to proposals from very high level saying, making comparisons, saying Singapore or Hong Kong is this big. This is the population. This is the density. Look at their per capita GDP. Look at their per capita income. Why can't these islands become a Singapore? Now, I don't know if there's anybody here, but to be able to, it is just such a, I don't even know where to begin to what is that question that's being asked at all? I mean, Singapore has a history. Every place has a history, has a context. You just can't become something tomorrow because you want to, even if you want to. So I was talking to a colleague, a friend of mine who was based in Singapore, and I was discussing what is the Singapore story that can be told to India and to the islanders that will make them realize that it cannot be done if it can be done, or if it can be done. There are many other things that need to be done before that. Yeah. So this idea, it's a bureaucratic idea. Who somebody must have seen, and you see it's same area, same landscape, same region. It's a shipping port, and we get a lot of business. So some things on those lines, if there can be to make people realize in India. And actually, I don't know why I'm suggesting that here, because maybe nobody knows Singapore in this audience as well. But that's something that I certainly find is a very interesting gap. And by extension, there might be other ideas that we need to keep, what is the value of those lands? What mistakes have we made elsewhere, if nothing else, that we don't repeat in these islands? Because this Great Nicobar Island, and this is the article I wrote just 3 days ago. It's a 900 square kilometer area. Yeah, the latest proposal is to convert 30% of this completely virgin island, with today 15,000 people. When 250 square kilometers of this island is to be taken over for a port project and allied activities. Warehousing zones, an airport project, a mass transport rapid system, tourism, nature tourism. So where do you even begin to, what do you do? I mean, 250 square kilometers in not one, in two different islands, 250 square kilometers, both are pristine forests. Not there anywhere on the legal documents. Indian legal documents say these are forests better than anywhere else in the world. These are indigenous communities. 30% of an island is to be now. Where can you even begin to fight it? I don't know. I really don't know if I answer your question, Chris, but every small thing in any place will, yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry to ask it.
I just, if we win battles elsewhere, we might be able to use the learnings from those battles to say, let's also, that they did it wrong or they did it right. It's either Singapore or Maldives. Maldives model. Maldives model is a pretty messed up model in terms of what it has done to the Maldives. But we don't see the full story.
No. So, and I think what worries me is that there may be many stories that we'll never know about in other parts of the world. You're talking about one small part of the world.
Absolutely.
And it could be multiplied over the whole planet, couldn't it? In places that are not populated, and because they're not populated, they're important to the survival.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what we can do, and I don't have enough experience to be advising anybody, but if we tell the stories from where we are,
yes,
of the places that deserve the stories to be told but are never told, I think that's the best we can do, and I may not be able to do anything where you are located because too far away and I don't know, and maybe vice versa. But where we are, I think if we can just even tell those stories, I mean, at least we will not be able to tell tomorrow that we didn't know.
Yes.
Because a lot of this is wiped away in the knowledge, in the lack of knowledge, or to say that it's okay because it didn't matter. And I think if we have the stories out there, we can still take it away, but not in the knowledge or the belief that there was nothing lost. We take responsibility and then take it away. I think that is okay. So to that extent, I think we can tell those stories. Absolutely agree with you.
Yes.
Any more questions? Ricardo, are there any more questions come through?
No, not at present, no.
Yeah, no. No, I'm wondering, Pankaj, because you're a scientist, but also a creative writer. How do you feel, you know, your creative writing is getting through to people? I mean, I've noticed now you've moved into children's stories. Do you think this is a really important area to move into, to get the message, get certain messages across to really young children through this kind of writing?
So I'll be very honest, I've stopped wondering about whom I'm reaching out to. It's a little bit of a self-indulgent. I'm doing it because I'm enjoying it, kind of thing, and the hope is it'll reach out. What I've realized is that we require all kinds of writings to be done, because different things can be communicated in different types of writing, and different kinds of audiences will be reached with different kinds of writing. And I've been trying my hands at 3 or 4, and I don't know how. I've done some scientific writing. I've been a journalist. I'm trying fiction. I moved into children's writing. So I think it does reach to different people. And there are experiences where one sees that the journalistic kind of writing or the scientific writing doesn't reach or doesn't break through, where fiction might do. But there will perhaps be another set of people who are not interested in fiction. They need the hard facts, they need the science. But for me, it has been more a personal journey of exploring writing, because with time, I have really started to indulge and engage in writing. The attempt is to try and write every morning, and the morning writing doesn't happen. The day ends up being a little empty.
I see. Would you consider writing for the theatre?
I would love to. I've studied filmmaking. Have you? So and a couple of small scripts we did sometime back. I've done a couple of short documentaries because but I would love to do that more as a creative challenge. But I don't know where to begin.
Well, we could include you in our workshop.
I would.
Would you take part if we're online?
That'd be fantastic. I'd love to give it. Yes, I'd love to give it a shot.
It would be fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm up for it.
Right. Okay. It's a deal. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions here? Yeah. And where can we see the short films you've written? Are they online or?
One is online.
Yeah.
I will send you the link. I'll have to look for it.
Thank you.
And there was one we did, which is somewhere, I don't even know where it exists, sometime back, many years ago.
Yes.
The short one is there, which I sent you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so are there any questions, any other curiosities? No, nothing. Very quiet. So if there are no more questions, we can finish there. And thank you so much, for so generously taking part in our seminar. And we'll keep in touch. We'll keep in touch for the second part as well, for you taking part in the playwriting. And thank you again, and be seeing you soon, I hope. Yeah.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes. Valeria, hai delle cose da dire a livello tecnico?
Thank you.
Nulla come al solito, quando avremo tutti i materiali disponibili, o se avete bisogno sempre per dubbi, domande e perplessità, scrivete una mail a me o al dottor Cassarino qui, che siamo disponibili a fornirvi ogni dettaglio.
Grazie. Va bene? Quindi buonasera a tutti. Arrivederci.
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 Grazie.